Daniel 7 we come to today. We've obviously done Daniel's 1 to 6 through, and now we're going to move into a completely different type of literature. We're going to move from story, history or narrative, now those words for the same thing. We're now moving to something called prophecy. And we're going to find out some of the things that have been going on in Daniel's spiritual life behind the stories that we've read through so far. It's sort of like we're going to look into Daniel's journal. It means, amongst other things, that the order is not strictly chronological in this section. And this is the last chapter written in Aramaic. I haven't said much about that, but chapters 2 to 7 are written in Aramaic, which means, amongst other things, that it's probably the audience they're after is more the Gentile world, and the message is more the Gentile world message. And so what is that message? Well, we could summarise that by looking at what God said and did to cause Nebuchadnezzar to lose his mind because he was just too proud. So we look in, this is just one verse from chapter 4, verse 17. The decision is announced by messengers. The holy ones declare the verdict so why? So that the living may know that the Most High is sovereign over all the kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes. And our favourite one, sets over them the lowliest of people. There, the politicians have been confirmed. No, I'm being a bit naughty, I think. But the point of this has been so that they may know that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth. And because he's the king, he can be the sovereign in any way he chooses. And now in chapter 7 he's going to reveal information about future kingdoms as yet another demonstration of his sovereignty now even of time, and to foster our faith in how infinitely capable God is. Now, prophecy. I don't believe that God reveals the future as a guide to preppers. It's not really down here so you know when to pick up your bug-out bag and head for the wilderness bunker. Biblical prophecy is not really designed to make you into a futurologist. Rather, it's designed to foster your belief in the God who really has the ultimate prepper survival option worked out, which is an eternity with him. So we're going to consider what Jesus says about prophecy. And he's in John 14 verse 28 is where we're going, and there he's prophesying about his death, he's prophesying about his resurrection, and he says to them in John 14:28, he said, "You heard me say, I'm going away, and I'm coming back to you." Yeah, that's his prophecy. "If you loved me, you would be glad that I'm going to the Father. For the Father is greater than I." And then he tells them why. In verse 29, "I've told you now before it happens." Why? So you can be a prepper? No, so that when it does happen, you will believe. You see, think about this. There were over 300 biblical prophecies about Jesus, which he fulfilled when he came, but not one single person correctly predicted exactly how they'd be fulfilled. It was only when he came and when it had happened that people were able to recognise, that's what he means. This is obviously fulfilled perfectly by Jesus. And the people who did that, who looked and understood and believed, they created Western civilization. They changed the world. So prophecy is wonderful, it is amazing, and does tell you about the future. And as we look at the prophecies in Daniel 7 we're going to see today, let's be amazed that God revealed the details of future kingdoms so well that critics, people who don't believe in prophecy, say, well, he had to have written this hundreds of years later. So let's see, and let's remind ourselves also that God's plan is way longer than our lifetime, which is unfortunately a great disappointment to our personal pride, because we like to think that everything revolves around our time on earth, but never mind. What we're called to do is lock into the greater reality of an eternal kingdom, which God is building, and which everyone who's put their trust in Jesus can share in an eternal kingdom. For when we have the perspective of eternity, then we can understand how much we are worth to God. And understand that God's working through the mess which sin has produced to lead countless of us to faith in himself and faith in the Son of Man. And we are one of those for whom God bought at a great price, the price of his own Son, dying on a cross in our place, so that we can have eternity with him. Verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. And so Daniel has this dream sometime around the events of chapter 5. And it's interesting that as well as interpreting the revelations and the dreams of other people, which is what we immediately think about him doing, he had his own dreams, his own visions. And it's considered that this dream is about 48 years after the Nebuchadnezzar said, "Come in and tell me what my dream is and then interpret it." And Daniel had a dream. And visions passed through his mind as he was lying in bed. And he wrote down the substance of his dream. And Daniel said, "In my vision I looked, and there before me were the four winds of heaven churning up the great sea." He wrote down the substance of his dream. He just wrote down the highlights. He just wrote down the main points. And some of the details are probably left out, which is quite disturbing to the inquisitive amongst us. Do you know how to keep a curious person in suspense? I'll tell you tomorrow. So there's a predictive aspect here. Daniel has this dream before the Persians came in, which is in Belshazzar's time, and that was quite a bit before the writing on the wall, which is interesting. It might have actually helped him to interpret that writing on the wall, because he already knew from his own dream that at some time Belshazzar's kingdom would be terminated. The Great Sea mentioned there is the Mediterranean Sea, but it's also a symbolic term. It's used as a description of the nations, of that moving mass of mankind, everyone restless. That one of the best titles for a TV series ever is The Young and the Restless, and that's what it is, that restless sea. And the four winds over the sea, that has the idea of the strife, of the restlessness of the Gentile nations, of people struggling against one another to dominate, to rule over one another. And as we know from the time of Nimrod, then through the Assyrians and the Babylonians, people have been striving to build kingdoms, and they still do. And then we have the first beast, Nebuchadnezzar. Four great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted up from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it. And here's a picture of the type of lion which the Babylonians had on the gates all over the place. A lion with wings. And the wings of an eagle on the lion talk about the speed which the lion, like Nebuchadnezzar, went about his conquests, and then he's conquered and the wings are torn off. And that speaks of the fact that Lydia and Media and Persia, which he had conquered, actually cast off that yoke, and they put up their own kings. And it also refers to the fact that none of Nebuchadnezzar's descendants kept going with his kingdom building stuff anymore. In fact, they all ended up being conquered. But the wings being torn off also probably refers to that period of insanity when he was his mind was taken away, and like the eagle, he lost his power, and that being lifted up from the ground where he'd been living like an animal, that describes him being restored to standing on 2 feet like a normal human being and getting his mind back after he looked up to heaven and he praised the Lord. The second beast is the Medo-Persian Empire. And there before me was the second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, "Get up and eat your fill of flesh." And the raising up of one side indicates that because it was a Medo-Persian, it was a conglomerate. One side, the Persian side, will be dominant in that relationship. The 3 ribs in its mouth, they're the nations that they devoured. They devoured Babylon, they devoured Lydia, which is like a big part of Turkey, and they devoured Egypt. So that's the ribs in its mouth. It's the second beast. The third beast is Greece. After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard. And on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. And this beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. And so the combination of a leopard, a really fast animal, and then you put wings on it, you put 4 wings on it, that talks about how swift was its conquests. And Alexander captured kingdoms faster than anyone had ever done before. He built his kingdom from Greece all the way through to Asia in just 12 years. Amazing. And the 4 heads refer to Alexander passing away quite young in Babylon, either due to pneumonia or due to some contaminated water. And 4 of his generals, they said, who gets the kingdom? Who are you leaving the kingdom to? And he said, I leave it to the strong. And there was 4 strong generals, so they divided up into 4 heads. And was given authority to rule. And given authority to rule. Think about this. It wasn't just because of the skill and the courage and the valour of Alexander and his troops that the nations were given to him. Had he not been assisted by the power of God, how could he, with only 30,000 men, how could he overcome Darius with 600,000? And in only 12 years get all the way across to India? Well, we look at it and we're saying, why would God do that? But that meant that the language of that whole region became Greek. And what was written in Greek? The New Testament. Yeah, so bigger things going on than Alexander. And that's totally advantageous for the spread of the gospel. And then the 4th beast, the scary one. After that, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. The Romans. The 10 horns were probably the Roman Senate, the Greeks in Ravenna, the Lombards in Lombardy, the Huns in Hungary, the Almans in Germany, the Franks in France, the Burgundians in Burgundy, Saracens in Africa and part of Spain, the Goths in other parts of Spain, and Saxons in Britain. And that's what they did. They came in, they really stomped on people. They asserted their power. But then attention's caught by the horns. Verse 8. And while I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one which came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. And this horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being and a mouth that spoke boastfully. And so here we see the Antichrist making an entrance. And the question is, who is he? Yeah. And every generation is inclined to say, well, let's look around and see what's happening in the world, and then we'll work out who he is. And over the centuries, who have the Protestant writers considered him to be? The little horn? The Pope. They like to point out that the Pope absorbed Ravenna, the Lombards and the state of Rome in becoming 3 of the 10 regions. That was his area, so that must be him. And they thought that the eyes of cunning and superintendence was like the Pope calling himself the overseer of the overseers, and the mouth speaking great things was the Pope boasting how he had unlimited jurisdiction, he could bind and loose at pleasure, he could promise to absolve all sins, and he threatened everlasting destruction to those who had dared to come against him. But, that was a good theory for a 1,000 years or so. But times and kingdoms have moved on, and many people consider the 10 horns to be the European Common Union. Well, time will tell. What we do know is there will be some consortium or alliance of 10 kingdoms of a worldwide government, and then 3 of those kingdoms will get subdued by the little horn. And we do know from Scripture this will be a very gifted orator. He'll promise peace in order to create a single government. And people will just be so sick of war. They'll just say, you can do it? Great, we'll go with you. And unwittingly, he'll get authority over all the earth. But it'll only be a short peace, because he's going to speak against the Most High, and he's going to greatly oppress his holy people. And he's going to have so much pride, he's going to what? He's going to seek to change times and laws. People, as they think about it, why should the calendar be organised around the birth of Christ? It's going to be a move, I think, to try and change the calendar to, let's go to the Chinese one, or let's go to the Mayan one, or let's go to some other thing. So that if that happens, we're getting close to the end of times. What about the laws? Well, we're seeing steady attack on the laws, which are based on the Bible, aren't we? Seeing that in our time. So this little horn, we believe, is the Antichrist from Daniel 9, verse 27. If you flicked over there, chapter 9, and at the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. And John talks about the Antichrist in Revelation 13. Revelation 13, verses 16 and 17. And it also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads, so they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast, or the number of its name. It's the same person in Daniel 7 as in Revelation 13. And the beast in Revelation also has 10 horns. And John there describes it as resembling a leopard, with a feet like a bear and a mouth like that of a lion. In other words, the beast that John sees combines the elements of all of Daniel's beasts. And it speaks proudly, and it oppresses God's people for 3.5 years. Revelation 13, and we're going to for a couple of verses. Verse 5. The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies, and to exercise its authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to blaspheme God, and to slander his name and his dwelling place, and those who live in heaven. It was given power to wage war against God's holy people, and to conquer them. And it was given authority over every tribe, people, language and nation. And the good news is that's only for 42 months. And then the court gets convened, and the little horn's power taken away and destroyed completely forever. Verse 29. But the court will sit, and his power will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. We're back in Daniel 7 there. And just some good stuff about this nasty guy in Revelation 19 verse 20. For the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet who had performed the signs on its behalf. With these signs he had deluded those who had received the mark of the beast and worshipped its image. And the two of them were thrown alive into the fiery lake of burning sulphur. So the fourth beast, we see the Antichrist coming in. But we do see something happening. Back to Daniel 7 now again. The Ancient of Days is going to show up. And this is not to be looked at lightly, because in the horror of what is going to happen, there's somebody coming. As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow. The hair on his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and his wheels were ablaze. This is the ultimate power we're looking at in the universe. This is a depiction of God himself. This is the final reality we get to see. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. And judgment day for the beast. Verse 10, the court was seated and the books were opened. And still, the Antichrist is chirping away. Verse 11, then I continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. He doesn't stop, does he? I kept looking until the beast was slain. He's talking to the end. And his body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. In the grace of God, the other beasts were stripped of their authority but were allowed to live for a period of time. That doesn't appear to be the final judgment yet, but it is the destruction of the beast here. So we've seen the awesome Ancient of Days, and now we're going to see his Son, the Son of Man, in verse 13. And in my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven. And he approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. And there, what's he get? Authority, glory, sovereign power. And all nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. And we see in this section, Son of Man, which is one of Jesus' favourite ways of talking about himself, and a very clear connection of Jesus being the Son of Man in probably capital letters. You can look in Ezekiel and you can say, who are you, Son of Man? Who are you, Son of Man? It's just, they just talk about a normal human being. But here it's now being given the meaning of God. And the interpretation goes on. One point that strikes me about Jesus referring to himself as the Son of Man is that when he comes, he'll be very recognisable in a human form. So, verse 15 now. I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit, and the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. I approached one of those standing there and asked him the meaning of all this, and so he told me. He gave me the interpretation of these things. The four great beasts are four kings that will rise from the earth. But the holy people of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever, yes, and forever and ever. It wasn't enough for Daniel. He wants some more. So he says, what's some more? Verse 19. Then I wanted to know the meaning of this fourth beast, because it was different from the others, and it was the most terrifying. with its iron teeth and its bronze claws, the beast that crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. And I also wanted to know about 10 horns on the head and the other horn that came up before which 3 of them fell, and that horn looked more imposing than the others, and that had eyes and a mouth, and it spoke boastfully. And then as I watched, this horn was waging war against the holy people and defeating them until the Ancient of Days came and pronounced judgment in favour of the holy people of the Most High. And the time came when they possessed the kingdom. So he gave this explanation. This fourth beast is a fourth kingdom. It's going to appear on earth. It's going to be different from all the other kingdoms. It's going to devour the whole earth, trampling it down, crushing it. And the 10 horns, the 10 kings who will come from this kingdom, and after them another king will arise, different from the early ones, and you'll subdue 3 kings, and you'll speak against the Most High and oppress his holy people, and try to change the set times and the laws. And the set times, I wonder if he will try and upset God's time, because he wants to delay how long he stays alive, doesn't he? Just speculation. So the holy people will be delivered into his hands for a time, times, and a half a time. Time is like singular, times is like 2, and half after that, 3.5. But the court will sit and his power will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. And then the sovereignty, power and greatness of all the kingdoms under heaven will be handed over to the holy people of the Most High, and his kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him. This is the end of the matter. I, Daniel, was deeply troubled by my thoughts, and my face turned pale, but I kept the matter to myself. So it's interesting to think about Nebuchadnezzar's vision and Daniel's vision. The ruler has a perspective, the prophet has a perspective. The king, and this is for anyone who's in charge or in power and has a little reign of their own, they see their reign as an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. And the prophet looks at the same situation and sees hideous beasts. The rulers of our world see their kingdoms as imposing, as artistic monuments made of valuable metals. And prophets look at the leaders and say, oh, they're just posturing, spruiking around, trying to look big in somebody else's world, in God's world, in the world created by an infinite being with infinite power and sovereignty. Why does God tell us these things? Why does he tell us what's going to happen? So that when they do, we can correctly interpret the times. Because when God starts the final push, it's going to be clear to us, because we'll say, we know the Bible. We know, and we'll say, yes, that fits the Bible. And it'll be clear. And every day we're closer to seeing this end prophesied here. And the challenge is to take the message on board and align ourselves with the Son of Man, not the little horn. Just a couple of implications. Prophecy is necessary because God's eternal, and so is his plan for all of creation. So God's in no hurry to fulfill what we see in front of us here. It'll be in his time. But it's here to let us know that something is going on and God's in charge. And it's also mentioned that there very well may be suffering for those who are here at the time of the final horn. But remember, Jesus suffered first. He suffered to deliver us. And those who reign with Christ will be those who have suffered. Romans 8:17, now if we are children, then we are heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we share in his sufferings, in order that we may also share in his glory. But because we know that the Ancient of Days will put an end to the Antichrist, we can do what needs to do is stand firm to the end. Because in Matthew 24:13, the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for showing us the future so that we will not be dismayed or discouraged if things go bad. Suffering doesn't mean you don't exist, that you're powerless or uninterested, or just means you're working out your plan to save as many as you can. So we give you praise and ask you to help us stand firm to the end.